So I'll explain one more time, guys, what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be going through the next $6 pairs for you guys for the next 24 to 72 hours to give you guys indications of where we could expect the price to move with the pending data that is going to be coming out tomorrow, as well as potentially where we could expect price to move by the end of the week. And so with that, I hope you guys enjoy this, and let's get right into it. So looking at it as of right now, just like we were stating before, structure is in fact rejecting that 115, 116 handle, and we are seeing some type of bullish orders being seen there. Now, one thing to factor in, guys, is that the bearish momentum is still in power, in which any bullish pushes to the upside are going to be treated as short-term or moderate to higher risk, and we're going to be stating that those bullish pushes will be in a state of liquidation or relief for continuation down of this bearish momentum, as that's what we are stating right here. Now, one thing to factor in, guys, is once we did break that, it's obvious on why we are seeing bullish orders sitting here as of right now. Now, one thing to factor is that even though we are stating that bullish orders are going to be sitting here, so any pullbacks to the upside will be treated as short-term or higher risk, simply for the fact that that is your initial impulse that was made. And so we are still expecting continuation to the downside to occur. We do see a potential head and shoulders formation occurring with the 115, 116 handle being your neckline. Now, if we do continue to push higher, creating a deeper pullback right to the weekly resistance, that would simply create a structural retest, and you are still looking to sell that back to the 115, 116 handle. Now, failure to do either, guys, the only way that bearish momentum becomes invalid is if above that 120, 122 handle. So looking at it from a daily time frame, we can see here that we are in fact creating some sort of range after all the news that came out last week. And so looking at it, guys, that is our initial impulse that occurred. This was all treated as profit taking or relief, and last week we saw continuation of that initial impulse. Now, one thing to factor is that we have not broken the lows just yet, and so until we break these lows and see lower lows, this is going to be warranted as a range or just a state of consolidation. And so looking at it from a smaller time frame perspective, guys, any last continuation trades are going to be warranted as the last one, simply for the fact that until these lows break, we are still expecting structure to consolidate or potentially show some bullish signs. Now, looking at it from a smaller time frame perspective, this was the impulse that was made. But notice what is occurring right here. This is forming reversal, not continuation. But even though that the signs are telling us that at some point we should expect some type of relief or pullback, we are still expecting continuation to the downside. And notice within the reversal pattern, we do see a short-term impulse. Hence, this is all warranted as relief. And so we are going to expect continuation back down to the lows and potentially even lower to the weekly support at the 114.347. Now, regardless, guys, if it reaches there at some point, we are going to expect some type of pullback back to the monthly support. Now, failure to do either may just warrant range or consolidation that may occur, but we are expecting a sharp movement one way or the other when the news comes out tomorrow. Now, one thing to factor is that if this does start to pull back to the 117 handle, this whole movement will still be treated as relief for continuation back down to those lows. That would simply just be a structural retest, and the bears would still be empowered. The only way that this bearish momentum becomes invalid is if and only if we break above the 118.54 handle, followed by a short-term continuation pattern. And then from there, you could attempt to run it back to the weekly resistance and potentially even higher to break above. Failure to do either, guys, is just going to warrant consolidation, but that is not something that we think is going to happen, only because we do have a lot of pending data coming out for tomorrow. USD CAD, one of the more shocking pairs that has occurred within the last week or so, as a lot of us were bearish on this pair. So looking at it as of right now, we can see a lot of pending orders that did occur in the past near that 133, 134 handle. And so if USD CAD starts to pull off from a bullish perspective, we would not be surprised. Why? Now, looking at it from a weekly time frame perspective, guys, we can see here that we did in fact have a lot of bullish pending orders. We are going to start expecting structure to start pulling off or rejecting, but that's not to say that it couldn't make one more rally there before it does start to pull off or liquidate. Now, if this in fact is the true breakout, this does have to start to pull back, and then from there we could expect a rally back to the upside. But looking at it from the daily time frame as of right now, This is not something that anybody should be interested in trading in because this is a very, very impulsive movement. Please factor in that this is still the main driver. And so as of right now, this is not very convincing still. You do want to see continued pushes above, but still, let's see how this formulates before we can make any clear definitive conclusions on which way USD CAD should move. But looking at it from a smaller time frame perspective, we were stating here, guys, that USD CAD from the setups last night could continue to push even to the weekly resistance one last time. But please take into consideration that after it made that strong impulse, breaking not only a weekly descending trend line, but also the monthly resistance, it didn't form continuation, but a reversal pattern. So we were either expecting structure to start to pull off or potentially to rally one more time, because that doesn't state momentum is going to shift. It's just giving us indications from a risk environment perspective. Now, looking at it from right now, even though we are in a state of reversal, this could start to rally one more time, and then from there we are going to expect that to pull off. If that does happen, this would still be treated as relief, and we are still going to expect a rally back to the upside. Now, if that doesn't happen, guys, and this starts to pull off from here, we are going to expect a rally back to the 131 handle, potentially even lower, all the way to the descending trend line. The ascending trend line. This would still be treated as relief. Still look for potential continuation back to the upside. The only way that you can state that any bullish momentum to the upside is invalid by USD CAD is if and only if we crack back down, stating this is invalid. You're going to look for a strong break, some type of pullback, and then look to run it to the weekly support. Failure to do either, guys, you're going to be sitting within this, and that's ideally where you're going to work within. That's not something that you should be interested in. USD JPY on the monthly time frame, we are starting to see some type of deceleration and exhaustion occurring within the pair. Now, one thing to factor is that there are two impulses that are occurring. We have an impulse within an impulse. You see this initial rally, hence all of this bearish momentum is treated as short term. As treated as relief or a state of liquidation. And at some point, we are expecting this to rally back to the upside. But looking within it, we did see this initial impulse with this short-term bearish movement until we in fact broke the lows, hence invalidating that initial bullish impulse. And now the bears are now in control. Any bullish movements to the upside are treated as short-term or higher risk, and we are still expecting another drop, potentially to the 105 handle, potentially even lower. Now, looking at it from a weekly time frame, guys, we can see in the past here that there were a lot of bullish orders here. Once we broke through, all of this is treated as relief or liquidation. Once we reach that area, that is treated from a bearish standpoint. We are going to see a lot of bearish pending orders here, not only because of the previous support, but because we do have weekly resistance and that descending trend found on the weekly time frame. Now, one thing to factor in, just like this is taught in my course, this is a beautiful example of a candlestick analysis pattern where it starts to decelerate or reject off of a long-term level. And so once this low does break, we are going to expect continuation back to the low, treating this as a 1, 2, 3 pattern, targeting the 1 back again. Now, looking at this from the daily time frame perspective, guys, we can see a potential head and shoulders coming about, just a more deeper one, right? The key critical area to break is that 108.64 handle, but within that, we do see the strong impulse. This was all treated as liquidation or profit taking, and so we are expecting continuations down to that lows around the 109.37 and potentially even lower to the 108.64 handle. Please take into consideration that the entire environment right now is range bound, right? If you do look at this from the tops down, this is the entire range that we are in. And so we are simply just looking to target the tops or the bottoms until we do in fact see lower lows or higher highs formed. So looking at it, this is the impulse. Hence, this is all treated as relief. And so now we are seeing continuations of it. So we are looking for bearish trades on USD JPY. If we do look at it from a closer look, we do see a sharp movement. This is a state of liquidation, gathering liquidity for continuation down. Once this breaks out, small term retest, so it creates a lower high. We are expecting a drop to the weekly support and potentially even lower. To the daily support and potentially even lower to the weekly support at the 108.64 handle. This is the key critical area to decide whether this is going to be treated as liquidation or a state of relief, or we should actually continue to drop all the way back to the downside. Please factor in, we are range bound once again on USD JPY. GBP USD on the monthly time frame, we are seeing some type of relief or exhaustion. Please factor in pounds economics to start. You do see a sharp movement. From there, you do see a long state of liquidation or relief. And then from there, you do see another sharp movement. And then we did see another state of liquidation or relief. Within the sharp movement, you did see short-term states of liquidation. And so we did understand why pound was pushing so hard from a bearish perspective. Now, looking at it, pound did in fact break the 3-month higher low that it was holding. And so it did create newfound lower lows, warranting continuation of that initial momentum. And so looking at it from a weekly time frame perspective, guys, we are at critical areas and we are expecting pound to start to decelerate or exhaust simply for the fact that this is too much of a push from a economic perspective to not be liquidated or see any type of correction, right? It's not healthy. And so we do need to see some type of pullback. So we do see a lot of bullish pending orders there from the previous resistance or bearish pending order area that was sitting. And so once we broke out of that, this does turn into newfound support. We can see now our structure is starting to pull off. But that doesn't mean, guys, that we change our bias or direction, right? It's simply just telling us that at some point we are expecting pound to pull off or reject or liquidate. And so looking at it from a daily time frame perspective, we did start with an impulse. Then we went from a reversal pattern, which turned into a state of consolidation. And we saw a continuation of that initial momentum. Then we saw a state of relief. And then last week, we saw continuation of that bearish momentum. One thing to factor in is that we are now cracking below the lows, but be careful. Very critical areas. There were 2 weekly supports sitting within 100 pips of each other, telling us that there were a lot of bullish orders sitting within here within the past. You're basically fighting a very strong army. That is going to be quite tough. Please factor in that is a reversal pattern. After the initial impulse, at some point, we are expecting that rally. Back to the upside. Now, even if that does happen, this is still treated as relief or a state of liquidation, right? Until we do, in fact, break back above that 137 handle to state that this is now invalid. But looking at it for the next 24 to 72 hours, we can see here that pound US dollar right now didn't first give us signs after this initial impulse. After we broke these lows, did give us signs that we should start to reverse. Hence, this would be treated as relief, as a reversal pattern. But notice what happened here. Even though it was indicating to us, right, that we were not continuing, that what we should reverse, momentum didn't switch. So now structure is showing us that we are in a state of relief or liquidation. And so we should expect continuation down to the weekly support. But on the bigger sell is not going to occur until we in fact crack that weekly support to potentially rally all the way down and make a really big drop. But please factor in that if this does, in fact, pull back, create a structural retest, and then from there drop, and let's say it just simply starts to decelerate and exhaust, right, on the drop, this will all be treated as a reversal pattern after this initial impulse. And at some point, we are going to expect a rally back to this descending trend. Now, once again, if this does occur, this is all treated as relief or state of liquidation, right, because of the entire environment. You have to factor that in. And so you would still be targeting downside unless we did in fact break above to state all of this is invalid. Failure to do either, guys, will just warrant consolidation, but as of right now, you are expecting a pullback for continuation to the downside. Looking at AUD USD from the monthly time frame perspective, we are seeing continuation of this initial momentum right here. This was also treated as relief or a state of liquidation after that drop. And so now we are seeing lower lows. At first we weren't, right? Because when we broke out of the ascending trend, we didn't in fact break the lows on the monthly and more importantly on the weekly time frame. When that monthly pin bar or bull hammer closed, a lot of us had thought, okay, we are going to expect some type of liquidation or relief, which we did get some, but it only gave us signs of where we could potentially rally back to. Like I said, we broke out of this weekly ascending trend, but check this. Structure was, trends on a straight line shot, but a consistence of highs and lows. So in that case, structure didn't make the big impulse we expected from a bear side, but simply just gave us indications of where we could expect this state of liquidation, which was a really nice hint for us, which was back at the previous low it broke, which coincided with the ascending trend that it broke, creating a last kiss formation as well, creating a beautiful flag for continuation of that bearish momentum. And so we are seeing that right now on the daily time frame. Check this out. Once we made that impulse, which turned into a reversal pattern, we made another sharp drop, which caused for a nice state of liquidation. Last week, we saw continuation of that following into this week. We are breaking those lows now, my friends. So now AU is a critical area once again, and we're below the weekly support here. We don't want to see false breaks, but don't be scared out, or don't be don't be fearful if this starts to pull back heavily. It's very deep movements that these pairs are making. So we are expecting states of liquidation, right? But the question is, when are they going to occur? Are they going to happen at first, right? Are they going to happen now? Or are we going to see continuations and bigger drops with all the data that's coming out? So looking at AUD, what had happened last week into this week? We saw that drop. This was the big state of relief or a correction that we were in. And then we saw continuation once we broke these lows. Now, notice this. In the beginning of this week, structure hinted to us that we should expect some type of pullback or reversal near the weekly support, because this information is not continuation, but rather reversal. But that doesn't mean that you shift this momentum. It's just indicating to us the risk exposed environment. And so notice what happened after we broke out of the lows. We made another impulse. Hence, this is all treated as relief or liquidation. So once this breaks out, our goal is to sell that back down to the weekly support around the 72.89 handle. Now, failure to do either, guys, if we break back above the weekly support, it's going to state that this breakout is a false break. And then from there, it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens. You could see a small flag, and then from there, it could rally to the the daily ascending trend. But once again, if that occurs, this is all treated as relief for continuation back down to the lows, unless we break back above the monthly resistance and the daily descending, right? You want to state that, you know what, this is no longer in power, right? That's only 100 pips. If that happens, you're golden. Failure to do either, guys, you're just going to sit within the range, kind of within here. This could flag out and then start to pull back, right? And that is not something that you should be interested in. You could get this last trade here. That is something that does look good to take. But besides that, guys, that is all that's going to happen on AUD USD. We could see the big impulse if structure continues to occur, if there's enough selling pressure on there, right? Because we are cracking the monthly lows, but we will see. Last but not least, NZD USD on the monthly time frame. Take a look at this. We do start with an initial impulse. Then from there, we did move in a state of liquidation. But once we broke this, that's the impulse that occurred. This is all the consolidation or relief that we are in. So yes, the bears are still in control, but been having some tough time breaking out. Now we are in a state of a range, and so any trades you're taking are just with lows of high as that range. Now within the range, especially on the weekly and daily, you can see that we're in a smaller range here, and so there are a lot of critical areas that can occur, because you can see a lot of pending orders after we broke out of basically that 18-month resistance. And so now the bulls take over this area, right? And so this still, though, bears are in power. You're just expecting at some point that if this rallies here, this should start to decelerate or exhaust, simply for the fact that there will be bullish pending orders sitting there. Now looking at it from a daily time frame perspective, this was the initial rally that occurred. This was the relief. And within that, we did see a short-term reversal pattern after that initial impulse occurred last week, which was easy to spot, and that was an easy trade to rally back to the ascending trend. Now, looking at it from a smaller time frame perspective, your trades are limited on this pair. Even though we're pushing as of right now, we do have news coming out tomorrow, not something we're interested in trading. Now, notice this. Once we broke out of this short-term ascending reversal, right, after that impulse, we see this sharp movement. It gives us indications that we should see some type of reversal to occur. Now, instead of forming a reversal pattern, we went into a range of consolidation, and then we made another sharp movement down to the previous lows where a lot of bullish pending orders were sitting. Looking at it as of right now, this is a tough pair to trade. Ideally, the only trades that you want to take are below the daily support and start running them back to the lows of the range of the consolidation. The big sells are below the consolidation, and you can run that all the way down to the monthly support. Potentially, news could push this to make that happen, but a failure to do so, this is going to be very short-term pushes. And by the way, New Zealand's not a pair that moves quite heavily. I mean, taking this trade down to here is going to be a mere 31 pips. And so that's not something that you guys may not be interested in. Right now, not a lot of opportunities occurring in New Zealand, but the really safest way is the buys are above here, the sells are below here, right? Because that's where higher highs and lower lows do form. And so with that, guys, these are the 6 pairs that I wanted to go through from a longer time frame perspective into the shorter time frame, showing you guys how we can potentially look for trades from 24 to 72-hour perspective and look at them from an entry and exit perspective. Thank you so much for taking the time out to watch this video. I really appreciate it. And now we're going to get into the questions and answers.